and welcome to one of our monthly town halls. We've been doing these, well, we've been doing them for about 2.5 years. These are in response to the awareness that came about for many of us during COVID. And one of the things that we became aware of, other than the fact that our country is in a messy shape, is that there's something called land acknowledgements, and I want to do a land acknowledgement, especially for tonight. I want to welcome you to TRU. We're located tonight in Manhattan, which is the unceded land of the Lenape people. We're going to be talking about Native Americans tonight, as you know. That's why you're here, I hope. And we're going to be talking about the need for greater visibility and inclusion. I want to turn the evening over for a moment to John Richardson, who's going to do a traditional welcome.
I just want to thank you all for coming. I just want to set the tone for the space. I want to stand in front of you guys. I just want to set the tone for the space and this time here. It's customary that we do an opening song. So I just want to present that. And we're going to do introductions later. Thank you, John. And we're going to meet the panel first, and then I'm going to bring my Zoom audience in so we can meet you, and we're going to also meet the audience here, and then we'll start our conversation. So this is by way of creative community, and I think that's very much in harmony with what we're all about tonight. So I would first of all introduce Nicolette Blount, and she's my co-host tonight. We're all co-hosts. The reason I call us co-hosts is because I want you as the audience to feel like you're part of the conversation. We're the hosts, you're the guests, we speak to each other. Nicolette, we're going to do some introductions for the panel. Then I want you to know that I will be bringing on everybody else in the room so that we can meet you as well. So let's start with you.
So I've asked everyone in the panel to introduce themselves in their native tongue for each specific tribe that's represented, and just say a little bit about yourself, obviously also in English. Chokma, Sohochafoa Nicolette Blount, Chickasaw. Hello, my name is Nicolette Blount, and I am Chickasaw. I am a playwright, composer, lyricist, and a producer. I'm also a performer, and I'm currently I'm working on a lot of shows, but the two biggest shows I'm working on right now is Savage the Musical, about my great-grandmother Wanda Savage. She was Chickasaw starlet in the 1920s, and also Red, the story of the Queen of Hearts. And I am also part of TRU, and I've gone through a lot of their producer mentorship programs and have learned a lot.
Thank you.
Bonjour, Anine, Danielle Jagelski, Nandita Nakaz, Anishinaabe Kwe Minowa Haudenosaunee. Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Jagelski, and I'm from the Oneida Nation and the Cliff Band of Ojibwe, and I am Wolf Clan. And I'm based here in Lenapehoking, and I'm a composer, conductor, mostly that, some orchestration, arranging, general artist, producer. So yeah, all the music things, and proud native theater artist. So happy to be here with everybody.
Tatsify Noikalo, Inwinakisahimyu Mukatsit, Inwinikwest Julia Keefe. Good day, everyone. My name is Himyu Mukatsit. It means she calls out from on high. I also go by Julia Keefe. I am a member of the Ninibu Nation, the Nez Perce people, out of Idaho. And I am a descendant of the Whitebird clan, direct descendant of Chief Ollicott. My mother is Joanne Kaufman, and her mother was Josephine Moody. Her mother was Lizzie Hayes Moody. So I am a descendant of a long line of badass matriarchs. I am a jazz vocalist, actor, and director of the Julia Keefe Indigenous Big Band. That's about it.
Awesome. Shaun.
Okay, Nisukuax Nistuani Kok Ikpioxistikung. Hello, all my relatives. My name is, my Blackfeet name is Distant Thunder, and my name is also Shaun Taylor Corbett. Distant Thunder is also the name of a musical that I co-wrote, and I was given my Blackfeet name 4 years ago, and it's really special to me because in the show there's a young person who is given that name, and so that's a big part of my life right now, is bringing that show to New York City, and we're going to have a production in the fall, so everyone come and see it. And Nicolette has been so supportive. I'm grateful to be here. I'm also co-producing the show with my mother, who also co-wrote the musical with me, and Donna Trinkoff and Hamas Musical Theater is producing the show, but it's very interesting to learn how to be a producer now too. So. And I'm also an actor as well. Been here in New York for many years.
Our offices used to be with us.
Oh, really? Oh, that's right. She says hello, by the way.
She better.
But just really grateful to be here with this incredible panel of Native artists to have this conversation.
John.
People Paleo, Mimaki, my name is John Scott Richardson. I'm an enrollment of the Haliwa-Saponi tribe and also Tuscarora lineage. My maternal line is Nensaman and Saponi, and my paternal line is parent in Tuscarora. And so I'm an actor here in New York. I've done some work with some new friends, and done some work with some other people here on the panel out there in our audience and on screen as well. And was a program theater director at Amarinda for a while after the pandemic, which is the oldest organization here in New York that's preservation of Native arts, literary music, literary theater, as also and mixed media arts. And so Diane Frater is the director there. I'm auditioning, you know, to talk normal story, actors still trying to get there, right? So being an honor to be part of the panel.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us.
And I forgot to say that I'm part of the Raccoon Clan. Since everyone was saying their clan, I'm like, I have a clan too.
I'm a Jew.
It's a good clan. No worries.
So we're going to go on to Zoom now. We're going to meet Marty. Marty, I'm going to try to pronounce your last name. Strenczewilk? Strenczewilk. No.
Strenczewilk.
Strenczewilk. So welcome, and just so everybody knows, we're having sound problems. You're going to have a hard time hearing it, but you will record fine on Zoom, so that won't be a problem. Everybody out there, Zoom land will be, in YouTube land will hear you. So introduce yourself.
Bujuani, my name is Marty. I am an Ojibwe playwright, and I'm also a multi-hyphenate over many years. I've done dance, act, direct, write, design, produce, you name it. Currently, I live in Boulder, Colorado, where I run a group called Creative Nations, which is a true land back effort from a predominantly white institution who gave us physical space, resources, money to actually be in the building and have our own sovereignty and really build art on our own. And I do that full time. It's a multi-arts enterprise too, which is really fascinating for me as someone who's been in theater my whole life, where we have sculptors and painters and poets and filmmakers and such. So it's a really fascinating day to day jumping cross mediums. I am part of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe out of northern Michigan. And my biggest probably focus these days, aside from producing work and being a playwright, which are kind of the standard, is because we've had this great success as a land back effort, it's been burgeoning into other opportunities. So other theater institutions, fine art institutions, music venues saying, oh, maybe we can do something too. How can we do this? And so very quickly we become I don't want to say consulting because I hate that word. It's terrible connotations, right? But we've become like a knowledge source for ways that this can really work, that are tangible, that really help Native artists. So it's the most exciting part of my job, honestly. And when we open 2, 3, 4, and 5, whether we're involved or not, having opened those doors will be, a real blessing to have been part of.
Thanks, Marty. We are here tonight because as I hinted at earlier, I think we've all become much more well, you guys have already been conscious of it. The rest of us have become more conscious of so many aspects of our culture that are really not fair and not equitable. I don't want to just talk about how, well, let me just set it up. Native Americans are, as far as I know and as far as I've read, the least represented culture in theater.
I have the stats if you need them. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, actually, do you want to say?
Yeah, I can. So a report came out from AAPAC, Asian American Performers Action Coalition, and this report came out before COVID. So I know we recently had a Native actor who was nominated for the Tonys, and we had the Larissa Fast Horse nominated for the Tonys after this study. Let me put on my glasses. So this is what they found. In terms of ethnicities and creative roles in theater, specifically New York City, 1.5% of the stories being told in New York theaters are Native. On Broadway, 0% Native directors, 0% Native designers, 0% Native artistic directors, 0% Native Broadway producers, 0% Native Broadway GMs, 2.7% playwrights on Broadway.
That's
like Larissa,
and
and also Lynn Riggs, who people probably don't know this, he's Cherokee. Oklahoma was based on his 1931 play called Green Grow the Lilacs, and in several places in Oklahoma, his work was copied word for word, scene by scene, straight from the original play, and he was not credited as the book writer at all. As far as nonprofit theaters in New York, Broadway, off-Broadway, 0.7% Native writers, 0% Native nonprofit board members, and the rest of the statistics for nonprofit creative roles are 0%, and all those roles that I just listed for Broadway is the same for nonprofits. And it's not that Natives aren't doing theater, because we have approximately, there might be a few more, about 12 Native theaters across the US, about 7 or more in Canada, so it's not like Native Americans are not doing theater. So those are the statistics.
Can we admit the person that wants to get in? That's the background for this conversation tonight. Not all of you are theater artists. You're both musicians. But in general, I want to talk about what it's like in this country, in this culture, trying to create a career as an artist and being Native American. There's got to be a few struggles there. I can't imagine that it's easy, although you tell me. What have your experiences been? Ladies first?
Okay, I guess I can start and speak to that. So I think creating a career in the arts is difficult for everybody, right? Anybody,
Sure.
we all know.
Yeah.
We all know that. And I think for a lot of Native artists and BIPOC artists in general, it's nice that, at least with my generation, there are starting to be resources for us and programs and things like this where we come together, and also like specific grants, people that are like specifically interested in what we're doing. But for me at least, and I can only speak from like a music side of things, and also working for a Native organization. I'm the producer for First Nations Performing Arts. But I think what's hard within the dominant culture of performance is that oftentimes audiences only want to know about Native stuff. So like if I don't write a piece that has alternating beats, like if I don't write a piece that is titled with an Indigenous word, like is that as interested? So to me personally as an artist, the struggle is not about my work or about my like gumption to do the work. It's about the struggle of how do people see me and how do I present myself to people.
I want to hear each of your individual stories, but I also want to just say that the other thing I'd like to explore now or later is what is specific to Indigenous art? What is specific to it? And I appreciate what you're saying about not wanting people to assume that because you're Native American, your art will be Native American. You want the freedom to be able to express yourself in other areas, in other ways. However, the other issue from my point of view is that we're telling stories. The reason we have art is we have art so that people can understand the worlds beyond themselves. And we have art that's been expressed in so many different cultures. We know that Asian culture is very underrepresented in stories that are told. And now tonight, it's been proven statistically, or demonstrated statistically, that Native American art and stories are being told probably even less. So I'm not putting the onus on you guys to have to tell those stories, but let's at least talk about what we can do to get more Native American voices heard and out there and get your culture better understood. The reason why we do these stories, why we tell stories on stage, is so that we can understand. If we don't see anybody else's life experience on stage, all we know is our own life. That's all we know. And so a lot of assumptions happen and a lot of damage is done culturally in general. So that's my thing. I'll try not to talk so much after this.
Well, I can tell you one of the things that a Native story will have, typical Native story that maybe Broadway doesn't think is okay, is like Broadway usually has like one crescendo, right? That it's building, 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 you have crescendo and then you come down a little bit. And Native stories, including also female stories, have this. They usually have two crescendos. So there's like two highlighted points in the story that is like the crescendo of the story. And that is, a lot of Native stories have that, and a lot of actually female stories have that. That is one thing that I've learned.
Let's hear a little bit from Julia now about your experience. Again, I know it's not theater.
I've done theater too, so I can jump in on that too.
Oh, good.
But
good.
I think this is inclusive of all art. You know, I think what makes Native art Native is that it's made by a Native artist, regardless of the. Yeah, Marty, I see you. I see you, Marty.
And he's got his hand raised too.
Oh, I got lots to say in support of what she's saying right now, so call on me after her.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, because I'm a jazz musician, you know, predominantly. The fact that I'm a Native American jazz musician is something that is so hard for people to wrap their noodles around. And you know, what do you mean by that? I've been confronted with such animosity and hostility around identifying myself as a Native American jazz musician, because when you think of a Native musician, there's a very, very specific image that comes into your head. When you think of jazz musician, there's a very specific image that comes into your head. And so the fact that like the dissonance of these two images coming together and being embodied in, you know, this sort of 5'6" gangly woman, you know, it's something that is really challenging for people. And so, I mean, a part of this sort of equity and inclusion of Native artists in your storytelling is recognizing that we're here. And, you know, we don't have to necessarily play a part that's rooted in our trauma. I don't have to play a woman who has been raped or a woman who has been murdered or is the descendant of murder. That's already in there, trust me. So if I am to play a part that is you know, not specified in terms of its race, if I played the part of Jenna in Waitress, I bring that Indigenous perspective, I bring that inheritance with me, and that in turn influences the character. But you don't have to write me a Native specific role in order to cast me.
Right.
Because, you know, I bring all of that with me. So, I mean, one of the things that really frustrates me as a Native performer is this idea that by hiring a Native actor or hiring a Native musician, you're not going to sell tickets. I've actually been on a call with a presenter in the Northeast who said, well, we can't book you because Native artists don't sell tickets. And if we are going to book you, we have to loop in education to it, and you have to do this. And so in order for me to perform my art that has inherent intrinsic value,
Somebody's head just exploded.
My head exploded because also at the same time, I mean, that's a whole other, like the fact that we as women and we as marginalized communities can't get mad about it, right? Because we also like want the gig. Like I want the opportunity to perform my art and also to prove you wrong, that like I am able to bring beautiful, powerful, valuable art to your communities, and yet we have to jump through all of these extra hoops and really beg you to see our value. You know, we end up doing consulting. We end up consulting for free just so we can get the gig. And so I know I'm kind of, now I'm just like wandering down this rabbit hole of like, oh, I'm so angry.
Yeah, my friends love to joke, like I'm like, oh, I was born a consultant.
Right? Exactly.
I just popped out, I was a consultant.
I was born a consultant, I was born an activist.
Yeah.
I was born a rebel, and I was born to piss people off, just like by existing, and I don't know why.
Do you know Tara Moses?
I do.
I've had this
absolutely.
conversation with Tara.
Yes, yeah, and Tara wouldn't pull any punches
Oh, no,
on
no,
that
not at all.
But so I mean, you know, the things that these are some of the things that we as artists have to deal with. And to speak to your point, you know, I have an Indigenous big band, and there was a booker who was like, okay, but what about your smaller ensembles? Are they also all Indigenous? Because if it's not all Indigenous, it's not going to work, because you, Julia, don't look Indigenous. So we're also combating.
You've heard that.
I've heard that a lot.
We're combating so many things just in order to be seen as artists, right? Artists of value.
We gotta let Marty speak, or
Marty.
I'll have to pay the medical bills.
No, if you get to know me, Bob, this is just how I'm like. So I'm a high energy person. So the first thing I want to say is everyone should go look up an artist named Greg Deal. He has he has 2 TED Talks now, but his first one is this really incredible. Greg Deal's a Denver-based artist. He's very well known, but he talks about as again, I mentioned, I work across a lot of different mediums. He talks about the expectation of a painter, right? So feathers and beads and moccasins and chiefs and buffaloes, etc. and he talks about this painting he made that's from a story from his tribe about boarding schools. And it tells a story of this young boy who had dark elbows and dark knees. And so when he went to the boarding school, the nuns took scrub brushes and scrubbed the kid's elbows and knees until they bled, because he must be dirty. And then they put him to bed crying. And then when we woke up in the morning, of course, he had bloodied the sheets. And so they beat him for bloodying the sheets. And this was a story that, traveled around. And so he made this painting that's a young boy kind of in the darkness facing away from us. He's naked and you just see his elbows like dripping blood. And this is a guy who's displayed in galleries all over the country. But getting that painting hung was a whole different thing, because that's not Native art. I have a good friend named Bruce Cook. He's a master Arapaho carver. He's also a member of Creative Nations. And I quote him all the time because I love this quote, because Bruce is kind of a tough guy. And he says, if I have to paint another fucking buffalo, and that line comes from this idea that Bruce's curated shows, been part of shows, et cetera, where they look and they go, oh, we really wanted Native art. And Julia is hit on the head of something that's really, really important at Creative Nations. Is Native art is made by Native people, right? Black art's made by Black people, Puerto Rican art's made by Puerto Rican people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The end. And every one of us on this panel has an incredibly different experience, just like everyone on the earth does. And so we bring that experience to it, right? Or play in music, or make in fine art, whatever it is. And so I have a couple plays that are very rooted in indigeneity, right? Like these two plays have a lot of traditional storytelling methods used. They're telling some Native stories, etc. I also play I'm writing right now that's inspired by Courtney Love. She's not Native as far as I know. And it's just like, I'm really fascinated by that idea and I want to write and tell this story, right? And that doesn't make it no different than this idea. I heard a podcast a couple months ago where an actor from Hamilton was talking about, after having blown up, getting the opportunity to get called in for a traditionally white role. And by the way, it's not a role that her whiteness is the role. It's just a role that always gets cast white. And she said she overheard in the room, because no one knew who she was, a couple of white girls who were like, ugh, Hamilton, all those girls are getting everything right now, and it's so ridiculous. And they of course didn't know, and then so her and her friend looked at each other they don't even realize that I'm sitting right here, And so because to them that role was a white role, right? And that's kind of this idea, right, of everything is a white role, white story, whatever, unless specifically told otherwise. So I think that idea of you don't have to cast a Native actor for a Native role, you have to cast the right person for a role. And if the role doesn't have anything dictated, well, that is the world's your oyster, right? We keep using that phrase global majority, which some people aren't comfortable with. But the one thing I will say about it is, if you have a play that is representing the world, like choruses, or, let's talk about Broadway, right? When your musical ensemble represent the world and it's 95% white, well, we know we've missed, right? So that's pretty clear. It doesn't matter what the description of the text said that actor was supposed to be or whatever. So I want to fast forward to something else, and then I'll hand it off to if anyone else wants to jump in. So as a Native writer, I found myself in a lot of rooms with amazing, amazing writers who I couldn't always get the right feedback on my plays. The same thing with actors, et cetera. In fact, one of my plays, it's called Pink Man. As I was working on it, someone suggested that I should change the name of it to The Only Indian in the Room. I kept talking about how I'm the only Indian in the room, and it ended up becoming the second title of it. So it's now called Pink Man or The Only Indian in the Room, because I am almost always the only Indian in the room, right? You get that canned. I worked in corporate America for a while. They turn to look at you when a Native thing comes up, because you're obviously the expert on all Native things, and so on and so forth. And so I recognize that if we're going to develop our stories, part of what we need is places to do that. And so I've actually, this fall, we're launching something called the First Storytellers Festival out here in Colorado. And so we've partnered with a bunch of theaters out here that I mentioned, that land back effort. They're giving us the space to use with no charge, which is how we've gotten it off the ground. But my biggest mission is not running the festival, right? The festival is going to be great because we're going to have all these amazing Native theater makers in the room working on Native theater together. My most important job is what happens after the festival, because a lot of times that Native play gets done by a Native guy, right? Or a Native gal. And then that's it. It's one production. And because it's seen as the Native play. And what it doesn't get is a life beyond a lot of times, unless your Thanksgiving play and it starts 4 white actors, right? And so like I went to TCG this past week, and my sole goal was to meet artistic and managing directors of major regional theaters, because I was just saying this to a couple of writers earlier today that I'm working with. I said, my job is when your script, because they're in a very early stage, is at the stage where I go, this is a script that needs to be done. I can make that phone call and they go, oh, he doesn't call often. He must be serious about these guys, right? This is what we want to take a look at. So I think like I'm big on action. And if people were to walk away with one thing that I'd want them to walk away with today is know that there are those of us out there that are pipelines for great Native artists. And the other end of the pipeline has to exist. The people who want to know what next play is coming down the pipeline, know what great actor or singer or comedian, etc. Because I have oodles of people that are incredibly talented, world class. I can't always find the places that are interested in expanding their story base, I guess, unless it fits into a very narrow description of what that is.
Thanks, Marty.
I totally agree.
I was just gonna.
I want to get to everybody else, and I also want to emphasize with the room that we want you to participate. That we want, you raise a hand, make a comment, talk. This is a conversation. Same thing with you, with people out there in Zoom. It's a conversation, if at all possible. So Jay, you'll let me know if any comments come up in the chat, since we can't put the chat up for us to see it. You'll keep me apprised of it, right?
Sure thing.
Okay.
One of
Okay,
the
John,
things-
and then we'll go to Shaun.
So, like one of the things I wanted to add, just listening to everyone, such great information and sharing such stories. I was a part of investigating those statistics that Nicolette spoke about. And one of the things that I've come across personally is being an actor and then recently a theater program director, which I had the opportunity to direct my first piece, is that some of the things that we came up across is, one, we don't have certain pillars that support our community efforts, right? So, and we kind of looked at those pillars as, as an organization, we don't have, for one thing, we don't have a dedicated space, right? There's a lot that you can do when you just have like the land base of a space, right? And so when you have that, or if you don't have that, it's hard to build trust in the non-Native community, or theater, film, television, with them to allow us to do what we've already been doing, mind you, for time immemorial, because we were the first storytellers in this continent that I know of, right? Long ago.
That's right.
And then every film and play and artwork that was sent back to England was of us as characters in those silent films, right? So we need to think and own that ownership of what we already been doing with no resources, right? And when they see the level of work that we do produce with the small amount of resources, Shaun would know, I'm sure Nicolette knows, you guys know that, and they look, wow, this is a good story. I can relate to this story. I find myself in that story. Why? Because it's really about the story, the quality of the writing, and if you allow us and trust us to tell our story, you'll find the connections in the story. So that's some of the biggest challenges that I've come across is like, where's the level of trust to turn over the reins to say, okay, it's been such a tight hold, on the money. I guess they're afraid that again, they're not going to book. We're not going to make money, right? Find out that money is generated. Our play that we just had on Off-Broadway at the Perlman was sold out. We sold out in Seattle, broke records in Seattle, and it's just like, wow, this is a play, and people of all genres and all backgrounds were coming up to us and relating to us like, that was an amazing story. I remember that. I felt that trauma. I know. And I think that's where we have to get to, right? I think we see ourselves as equal now, but the equity to support our efforts and give us that sort of that free reign, I think is where we have to get to.
That goes back to something that Marty said, which is basically that you're creating the art, you have places to create it, but the pipeline doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
And so I think one of the things that we can try to address tonight, not now because I want to continue along lines. We can address how we can find, how we can convince the gatekeepers
Yeah.
that there is art out there that's worth for them that they're exploring. And the one small step that I'm taking is having conversations. That's the only way I think we can. That's the only way I'm able to spread awareness. So let's move to Marty now. Tell us your story a little bit.
Oh, Sean, yeah.
Sean.
No, that's okay. That's
Sean.
okay.
Marty, Sean.
No, just following up on these incredible thoughts everyone's sharing. You know, what's funny is what I've noticed in all the plays all the Native stories I've gotten to perform in, that it's some of the best reactions from the audiences, and some of the warmest, and just audiences clamoring to want more. But that's been ahead of where the producers and the regional theaters. It shocks me that it's taking so long, because the audiences have been eating these stories up. They want them, not just Native audiences, but non-Native audiences. And there's so many that we have that we're writing, and I think back to, thank goodness it's happening, but Larissa's play out in LA, I think Fake It Till You Make It, I think it's called, but that was the first one that was canceled from a season when they were having financial trouble. So it's just on the verge, things are just on the verge, and it does take conversations like this and an awareness building that it's actually, we're going to make theaters so successful, we're going to make producers so successful if they give Native people the ability to create our own stories without the expectations of it has to be, it's Native, so it has to fit in this box or that box. And I've always, wanted to, we've been working on our musical for a lot of years. And I've gone through the roller coaster of it's too much this or it's not enough that. You need more drums in it, and I've sometimes fallen trapped to doing that, and or thinking I need to do that and and then I need to explain this, I need to break down this thing on stage and for a non-Native audience, but it lessens it makes the show. If you have to do that, it just takes away something special. And if you just because what I've learned going to my community and going to ceremony in Browning is you don't always, you walk into a space and you have to just accept it and take what comes to you, and without asking all these questions. What is that? What is this? I have to describe that. Why does this happen? But you have to just let it be. Yeah. And that's one of the things with, I think, producers trusting Native people to just tell the stories as we want to tell them. I created Distant Thunder, or I co-created Distant Thunder, because I've always wanted a big Native musical. And I know Nicolette is, we've been talking about our experiences creating a Native musical and what that is. And I'm a pop songwriter.
Me too.
And yeah, we collaborate with the Florendo family, because we have power music in the show, but we do a really cool melding of musical styles. But I didn't see it out there, and it's been hard. It's been a lot of years talking to people, trying to get money to get produced, but we're slowly getting there. And it's just, we didn't see it out there, so we wanted to create it, and hopefully, help open the doors in New York in this, because I started acting in New York and I didn't see Native roles. So I did a lot of different roles, which I don't know if I would do now. But I played Italian, I played Frankie Valli.
You played Italian?
I played Italian.
That's great. You're writing history, man. That's beautiful.
I know. So
In the Heights, right?
In the Heights.
I did Tony and Tina's for a long time.
What's that?
I did Tony and Tina's for a long time.
All right, yeah.
Fellow Italian bros, so.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we've touched on one solution that could be looked at and maybe pursued. I've said the same thing about the BIPOC community and Asian community. You said it before, the 0 producers. Is there a way? What?
I'm one.
Yeah, you're the first. You're the first, right?
I'm a little piece.
So
Are we
is
talking
there?
specifically of Broadway producers?
I want to talk about theater producers. Not
No, because there are theater producers that they're just not in New York.
Yeah.
So, what my theory is that the producers are the people that have the stakes in getting the stories told. So if we can somehow or other encourage and build more producers and artistic directors, you say that they are around the country, but you also said there were only 12. You said 12 theaters.
There's approximately, it might be a little bit
I mean,
more, it might be about 50.
That's not a huge
And then I
representation.
think it's only really like one equity house, right? And that's Native Voices, right?
So-
It's only equity.
How do we get to your community and convince people that they should go into theater and get your voices heard?
People are in it, people are doing theater, that's the.
Not doing theater, I mean producing
But
theater.
producing theater, well, these are, considering the size of like our population in our communities, that's like quite a lot of theaters, and that people are rising through the ranks, like Jeanette Harris was an artistic
Yeah.
director of, Portland Repertory Theater and like Oregon Repertory Theater, and we have, I think it's a disservice to say that like it just plays into the "Oh, the poor Indian" like mantra, and like I'm not your poor Indian, like I'm an artist, like hear me what I do, and I think we all are, and all these people that are out here doing the work and making amazing art and telling our stories, and every story that we tell is Native, whether it has to do with specifically Indigenous story or not. And so I think it's like to talk about how to represent the artist is where it comes, and like that has to come from trust from audiences, collaborators, producers, of course. Like when you take a piece of like Native work, it shouldn't be more of a risk. Like, I mean, producing anything is a risk. Like we all know that, right? And so why are we taking these Native stories and being like, oh my God, this is so much more of a risk than putting on some other story? That's still a risk, Like that's kind of where I'm at.
And it feels like, to me, okay, well, for my show, it's like, it's never like Native enough, and then it's not white enough because the white people think it's Native and the Native people think it's too white, and it's like this middle of the road thing. But I will say that it does feel to me that people in New York are okay with us doing Native stories in our Native theaters. But how do we bring it into, mainstream, off-Broadway, Broadway, like what you're doing is amazing. Like, that's like, not that New York's the end-all be-all, but it seems like New York, for some odd reason, is not accepting these stories at all. It seems, or not very many. I mean, some.
Well, I think again, it's awareness. I think it's basically making people getting the word out to the people that are in a position to actually help move these stories into productions.
There's also,
it's not going to happen.
I think it's worth saying too, though, that some artists, some Native theater artists and artists of other disciplines, like, don't want to go that route.
Right.
So, like, there are many theater artists that they want to do their own thing because of the like harm that has happened to them within the systems that are built.
Right.
So I don't know if anybody knows the answer, but perhaps the answer is decolonizing everything, decompressing everything, like, and start to build from the ground. Maybe it's getting in there and tinkering around in it. But I think that there is that should be said too. That there's not that. Why should Native theater artists have to mold themselves to fit within a system that perhaps wasn't made to have them in it?
Yeah.
Already.
Yeah, I realized I raised my other hand and my digital hand without really thinking what I was doing here, so I got to figure this out. I want to jump in, like, as we're talking about solutions, because I agree. Like, I like to not just sit around and talk, but actually, like, what can we do, right? Actions, right? Because there's only so many days that exist for each of us.
Marty, can you go closer to your mic?
Yeah, is that better?
Because what you're saying is important. I want us all to be able to hear it as well as possible.
Sure. So at Creative Nations is where specifically I see this. I have these young people who are passionate and interested, and I don't have the resources to train them, And so we have First Storytellers Festival coming up, and I have limited roles. And so I'm picking where I can get young people. Like, I have a design role and I'm getting an MFA student, right? And I have a dramaturgy role and I'm getting a student who just graduated. But most of the time, I don't have the luxury, and I got to go for that senior person who's going to come in and just kill it, right? And that's not what I want to do, right? What I want to do is shepherd new people. I have a couple of interns, for example. I have these 2 teenagers. Disclaimer: one of them's my daughter, but my point is, like, they're people who could be the leaders, you know, in 10 years. And we don't always have the resources, the bandwidth. Like, these Native theaters aren't very big a lot of times. They haven't had a lot of resources. These aren't like Steppenwolf and, you know, these like major powerhouses who have staffs of hundreds. You know, I'm a staff of 1, and then lots of artists involved. So I'd say, like, if partnerships to me seem like really interesting, if we could find ways to train more people who are interested, and I purposely didn't say young people, because I think there's lots of people who are not necessarily young people who are also interested in learning new skills. Maybe they're entering the theater for the first time, or the arts, so that they can produce their own work, so that they can produce someone else's work. I think there's opportunity, but we can't be the only ones trying to shepherd those people, quite frankly.
Can I put this out there, just listening to this? I will offer a scholarship to any young person, or any person who was interested in producing, who was a Native American, if you can connect me with them, and we'll put them into our training program. I mean, that's something specific I can do.
Yeah. And I think the key word was, you said partnerships. I think that's the key word, is partnering with either these bigger theaters that have money, or these bigger people who are willing to support. And I think there is, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that sometimes there tends to be like, oh, well, you guys have all the big casino money, don't you get all that money? It's like, no, I don't get any of that money. What are you talking about? Like, yes, am I registered Chickasaw? Yes. Do I get the money? No. I mean, scholarships for my kids for school and stuff, but I think there's this misunderstanding that if you know, my child is registered, she'll get a full ride in college, and that's not true. She can get some scholarship from our tribe, but I think that's another thing, that people assume that natives have money, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, especially in the reservations, poverty is the worst it is anywhere in the country, basically. Right? Like, there's no worse poverty than on reservations.
My mom
not this
went
country.
to her Hopi family's reservation, and they had no running water and no electricity. I mean, and that's in the United States, people. That's still going on, and no one knows about it. It's a dirty little secret no one knows about.
So that's like, we just to support that, you know, so when I'm speaking earlier about the pillars to build that type of situation, right? Of course, I mentioned dedicated space, right? We don't have wealthy donors that are willing, Native or non-Native, right, to support that. Nor do we have an endowment. You know, no one's starting off with $100,000 in the bank drawing interest off of that money. To even have a staff, right? To have somebody to answer the phone, somebody to do media, social media for their organization. And the other thing would be the foundational multi-year funding, right? So when you put all of those together, yeah, you can build a sustainable program, right? You can start training the young, bringing them in, scholarshiping them in, even if it's New York, Chicago, LA, Texas, Florida, you know, major hubs, right? But we can bring in the rural communities and then eventually start satellite programs in those rural communities as farmhouses to then filter out to larger areas, right? So I think, again, but it goes back to those pillars, right? If you have maybe one in place, maybe, you know, and I can draw my own personal experience in working with Amarinda. I mean, Diane Frere, as a Native woman, female, funded her own full feature film, but it was through grants, and that was it. And it took her almost 7 years or so to complete this process. Not everyone has that tenacity to stay at it for that long. Your play. You mean, you've been at it for, some of these playwrights can put something out, and then in 2 or 3 years they got funding. It's on an off-Broadway venue, it's in a regional theater, and then it's maybe trying to get into the rotation at Broadway within a 5-year period. Your play has been around for a while.
Shaun, when did you start yours?
You know, but so
2010.
that's what I'm saying. So that
2017,
process right there is not as easy. Just and it all goes back in my thought, and it's just my opinion. That foundation is not there, right, for us to even start that, right? Because one of my mentors, Bill Yellowrow, Centerpoint, playwright, one of the greatest, in my opinion, playwrights of this time. in this time said, like when you get off the bus or the train or wherever in any major city, you should be able to look somewhere and say, where's Native Theater? The Native Theater, not a sub house or somewhere else or whatever. It doesn't exist,
Yeah.
right? And it is 2024.
Yeah.
Right? And with technology, I remember in a TCG meeting doing Zoom, I was a part of one of the subcommittees, and one of the things that Delana Studi talked about, because she was on that same panel with me, or group with me, is that because of technology, she was able to expand her theater outreach, right, to people that normally never would go to theaters or support theater. And so I think now the use of technology can help that process as well, right? That's why I was using that example, right? Because they didn't know in my community, and Miss Jamil might be able to chime in on this for myself, is that the only theater we get in Hollister, North Carolina, which is where the Haliwa-Saponi tribe is located, is through the churches. There's nowhere for them to go unless they go travel an hour somewhere to Raleigh, which they don't have the resources to go, right, to travel that far, and to even partake in a theater camp or workshop. And so, which is some of the things that I'm personally looking at to try to bring to the community, right? But it doesn't exist now. And I'm sure it is like that in other places, right, of the country. We don't have, I mean, in the U.S., we don't even have high-speed internet, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, to lobby to say we want to do, it's a challenge, right? And so I think that, and I met Marty the other day because we were on a dramaturg workshop. He was on that call that Native Voices did, right? And we spoke earlier about, you know, what is dramaturg's role, right, within that, and to ask those tough questions, right, like we're asking now, like those tough questions. And I think that, you know, I think that's just some of the things to think about when you go back to what Mr. Ost was talking about, is, you know, supporting, offering scholarships and support, but it's got to be broader than that, I think, in order for it to be sustainable, right? Because at Amarinda, we did a play, we did a full production, maybe a showcase, once every 2 years or one every year, maybe, right? And then we didn't have the funding. We had to wait 2 years or so to do the next one. And we actually didn't even go to the equity to do the last one. We just raised enough money to pay everybody a very good salary, right? But that was another year later, right? So it's just, you know, it's enough material, plenty of material. And I look at I have a lot of film and theater background. I mean, for film and television conversation, theater is kind of new for me. But I think this equation that is kind of similar is that, like in film and TV, you have good directors, good writing material. You usually don't have funding, right, or distribution. Or you might have distribution, you don't have good material, right? You know, and it's like broken spots in the chain. And theater is sort of the same, maybe more spaces in the chain, right? But if you don't have all of those pieces in place, I think it just starts to become frustrating. And we do our stuff. We're going to do great work. You know, that's been proven, right? Regardless, because it's a passion that we all have. We wouldn't be sitting here today if we didn't love it. I wouldn't have drove 8 hours to be here.
Oh my God.
To talk on this conversation if I didn't
not know you
love
were doing that.
the conversation and where it can go and what we could do as we work together, right? And you know, so I just my little spiel, but I just, you know, I think those foundational pieces are critical.
And kind of what everyone's been saying too, like, it's not about like, oh, these are Native stories. It's like, these are human stories.
Right.
Like when people go, oh, it's Native story, I don't know if our audience will relate to that. They're human stories. They're not just Native stories.
Right.
They're human stories.
Right.
And a lot of them everyone can relate to. Like, just because it's on a reservation or wherever the Native story happens to be, or not.
We talk about this a lot in the workshops.
And we like to be seen as contemporary, right? We are the storytellers of today. Hopefully, the next 7 generations, we can lay a good foundation, right? I mean, we can't tell the same historical piece over and over and over again, and then try to put spins on it to make it new or different or interesting, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but we live in a contemporary society. I live in a home. I got running water. I mean, still live on a farm where I know where's no running water, right? My auntie's house is right there. And so it reminds me every day. But, you know, so, and then it shouldn't be so much about identity politics, right? Just like you said, because just because I'm Native and I produce something, that doesn't have to fall into the category, oh, this is just Native art. Because then you start segmenting. The intellect wants to dissect and break it up and separate it, right? And if you just, you know, I'm an artist that produce, and yeah, I'm a tribal member, right? And I'm proud of that. But because I want to tell a story about a NASCAR race car driver that happens to be Native, then that doesn't mean it's Native art. It's, you know, it's a story about a human being, you know. And so, you know, this just, sorry, I get excited.
I got it.
Oh my goodness, Marty has his hand up.
And I feel like I'm going to interrupt otherwise. So I keep wanting to raise my hand, you know? So I just want to really pinpoint on the conversation about Nicolette said they're human stories. I think it was Nicolette that said it. And so I find, I mean, if you want to go to pop culture reference, look at Reservation Dogs, which it's a different experience for a Native person, but it's a very accessible experience for a non-Native person. I talk to a lot of my non-Native friends all the time about, like, they love the show, they can get into it. There are things they don't get, they're not supposed to, and that's totally okay. And there are things I don't get when I watch certain shows that are meant for other cultures. But the experience in general is universal. I have a play that specifically deals with this idea of being torn between multiple identities. And the number of people who've come up to me who are not Native, who connected to that play because they're LGBTQ, they're mixed race in a different way, they moved from another country. Like, there's so many ways we have mixed identities, right? And so that mine happens to be about trying to be a Native person growing up in this white racist town, but that's not what it's really about, right? It's about this more universal story of, like, figuring out who I was, how I fit into the world, why I was told where I should or shouldn't be. And people really identified with that in ways I hadn't even predicted. But then I sat back and to that point again, it was like, well, no, like, that's a very common story in a lot of ways, right? Like, how do we find our identity in the world? Not how do I find my Native American identity? So I think well-crafted stories have that universality to them anyway, right? So that's always an important piece. If it's not good theater, it doesn't matter who wrote it, right?
Can I share one of my favorite stories about
please do.
This? It's not Native American, it's Jewish. But a guy named Sheldon Harnick wrote a show called Fiddler on the Roof, and it did very well, and it was very popular, very successful, and the producers were planning a production of it in Japan. And Sheldon and his collaborators said, Japan? What if they going to make this show in Japan? It happened, they produced it. Sheldon went to the show, and people came up to him afterwards and said, how do you know so much about our culture? And that's a true, I mean, Sheldon has told me the story. So basically what this proves is one of the basic tenets of art, which is that there is, in specificity, there is universality. The specific leads to the universal when it's done well and it's done with heart. So I'm all with you. I'm with you guys. I was expecting the conversation to be a little different. I was expecting it to be what is different about Native American art versus the mainstream culture. And clearly, I'm hearing you say that you would rather not be pegged, and you would rather be open to just it being Native American art because you created it. So I think that's a very good point, and I think it's something that we should respect. So I'm not going to push the other point. I'll stop.
Yeah, well, just as a side note, it doesn't really have, just to support what you just spoke about. But, okay, so historically, when we would create in our communities, right, it might be a bowl, it might be a rug, it might be what have you. But it wasn't until the art world started to label it as Native art. To us, it's functional work, right? So we sort of see our stories the same way. It's our function of our life, not so much being art. And that was only when the Western world started to say, okay, yeah, we can, Native art, it can be sold somewhere, or it can be put in a museum, and that's
monetized.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's when the whole idea of what art technically from that perspective is, but to us, it's just a part of our spirit to just create for a functional, whether it's telling a story about a hunt that we did, or a journey, or a marriage ceremony, or coming of age ceremony. When we would pantomime these things in our dance and our storytelling, it was just part of our descriptive life. It wasn't seen as art for monetary reasons, right? And so that also has to, when we think about that, we had to kind of dive, like she said earlier, like dive back on these institutional things that, you know, we have to sort of try to fit into or not fit into, or require for us to fit into. Just like you spoke earlier, it might be two crescendos in a play. It may not even be a villain in the play. The villain might be the ideology of how someone does something, right? But we tell a story to help address that, right? As opposed to that person is the villain and we are the hero. You know, that's another thing.
This goes to another point, the point of educating the rest of us to understand that our standard dramaturgy may not apply to what you're doing. I have this problem with our play reading series. I have readers who have expectations of what a play is supposed to be like, and therefore we have a tendency to get into the finals and the semifinals plays that are similar, that follow the dramaturgical rules, that follow the expectations of the white readers that I have.
Right.
I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that one thing that has to happen is we have to be able to educate us in theater to understand that storytelling and drama and theater can work in a different way than we expect it to.
Or we could include other people within those processes that already know. So you could have Native representation on those panels, leading those places. You could, I mean, it all comes to me, it means land back. Like, if a person is in place, that land is giving back. Like, so why is the panel all white readers? Like, because maybe even if it's not an Indigenous person that's able to be on the panel.
I was just making
Sure.
a point.
Yeah. But if it was, or even if it's not a Indigenous person from North America, like somebody from a different culture everybody comes, like we were saying, with their different experiences. Every human is a different person, like, and it has a different experience. And if we have a breadth of those experiences there, and that's who's reading, and that is who's decide, those are the gatekeepers, and those gates there are more of them to walk through, I guess.
And they're more narrow.
Well, in a way, but they're also more broad, because if we have to go, like, if we have to produce something, and somebody really wants something to be done, and they're passionate about it, then that is, like, the first step in making it happen. And I think, to me, it's like, if the problem is that everything is starting to sound the same, like, I always go and look back, I'm like, who gave this person the grant? Like, who won this grant? Who are the producers on this? Like, even if the star of the show is a person of color or something, I'm like, why does this music sound this way? Oh, the orchestrator was the same white man that's always the orchestrator. Like, and so, like, the entire team, I mean, equity comes from every person, like, the money, the actor, the person at the door, definitely the people having the money, and the people deciding what gets to produce. And, like, so I think it's less about, like, okay, we have these awesome theater artists, which, like, obviously we do, everybody knows that, but it's about, like, why are we only trying to put Native people on the stage for white audiences to see? Why aren't we within every level of production?
Yes.
Part of, like, a crucial part of decolonizing the arts is indigenizing your institution.
Yes.
And, like, ensuring that, you know, the folks who are in arts admin, the folks who are in production, like, every aspect of this, you know, you have to think about your hiring processes. You have to think, like, that's especially in the arts, you have to think about indigenizing your practices. Because if you don't indigenize your practices, if you're not looking with that same kind of cultural sensitivity and you know, that honest wanting to amplify voices of color, it's not genuinely wanting to amplify voices of color, then you're just exploiting voices of color.
Yes.
And that's another crucial part of the art world that there needs to be sort of like a come to Jesus moment.
I think a lot of theaters think a land acknowledgement is enough, and that's not enough. And the land acknowledgement, also the way that they do it, is not how it's supposed to be done. They think, oh, if we put this on our webpage, then that will be fine.
Check that box.
Even though we've
Done.
never had a native story done at our theater, we're gonna put this land acknowledgement, we'll be safe.
Right.
It's all performative, and it's sad. It's really, really sad.
It was a good first step,
It was.
but the unfortunate thing is that
The follow-through sucked.
a lot of people sort of stopped there, and I find that when we're trying to interact with all these not predominantly non-native organizations trying to get our artwork seen and so on and so forth, it does feel a little showboaty. It feels a little performative in terms of their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And that's why you find a lot of us hiring ourselves and just doing it ourselves, because then we don't have to deal with the sort of nonsensical, weird cultural insensitivities and feeling sort of like the token native who's being sort of brought through this institution for everybody to look at. But that's, if we're in a forward-looking kind of way, especially in the arts, in the theater world, the folks in charge do have to have that self-reflective moment of like, okay, how can we be allies and of service to Indigenous performers in a way that is righting a lot of historic wrongs, as opposed to how many tickets can I sell.
I have a question for you, Julie.
Oh yeah.
Because you seem to have a degree of success as a jazz artist.
She has a major success as a jazz artist.
Yeah.
A little bit of a celebrity.
So my question is to you, how has your audience been built? How have you built it? Has it been you? Have you had help building it? You obviously have a following.
It's been kind of it's been an interesting process of building my audience, because in my brain I'm not even thinking about building my audience in such a way. For me, I'm making art that is authentic to who I am and the things that I like and the things that give me joy. And so when I first got started, I was singing a lot of swing music, like the 1940s big band stuff was my bread and butter. I loved it. And so, growing up in Spokane, Washington, it was a lot of, predominantly white audiences coming to this teeny tiny jazz club that no longer exists to hear this little kid sing jazz. And they thought, wow, that's kind of weird and wonderful that this kid in, 2004 is singing Billie Holiday music and Ella Fitzgerald music. And so from that sort of hometown growing of just like being a jazz nerd and people being really supportive of my nerdiness, it's grown, but I feel like it really has grown exponentially when I really did incorporate that Indigenous identity into how I present myself. Because for the longest time, I felt that I had to keep these two parts of me separate because so many people saw that as a problem, unless I was talking about another Native performer. So part of the bridging that gap was talking about Mildred Bailey, who was the first woman to sing in front of a big band in the 1920s. She was Coeur d'Alene, and that's a huge part of jazz history that no one really knows about. And so being able to talk about her, that sort of gave me permission to be like, oh, by the way, I'm also Native American. So I'm following in the footsteps of this jazz great, this trailblazer. But like, it really wasn't until, the creation of the Indigenous big band, the creation of, the Mildred Bailey project, that then, I was sort of tapping into both sides of my identity and both of those communities and finding that marriage. And so people from, both the jazz side and the Native side are really embracing that we're part of this history too, that we are crucial parts of this history. And so that's kind of how I usually just jump into a history lesson about Indigenous people in jazz. And so then, people get excited.
So another question about this, I'm going to come back to everybody else, I promise. But I'm very curious about this.
Were there any support systems for you as you were developing your career?
Oh, absolutely.
And where were they, and how did you find them, or how did they find you?
Okay, so I mean, growing up in the inland Northwest, I was incredibly fortunate because of the focus on jazz music in the music education system. So there's a huge jazz festival that happens in Moscow, Idaho, every single year. It's called the Moscow, Idaho.
It's the only thing that happens at
It's
night.
I love me some Moscow, but yes. So you know about the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival, yeah. And so with the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival, all of the schools got to compete. And that's how I actually got into jazz, was that I started competing in my at Lionel in my 7th grade jazz choir. And then I saw that there was a solo vocalist competition as well. And so 8th grade, I started competing as a soloist. And that just kind of like started the snowball. So I mean, having those mentors in the education system and really seeking them out for me was a huge part of that support. But I mean, again, I really went down the jazz route that first, in the early years of my career. And then once I started sort of feeling that something was missing and wanting to incorporate this really important part of who I am back into my artistic expression, then I started finding more Indigenous jazz musicians that I could talk to and collaborate with. And that's actually how the big band came about. I was connected with a Diné jazz trumpeter named Delbert Anderson, who's one of my dear, dear friends. And it was supposed to be a half-hour getting to know you kind of phone call, and it turned into a 3-hour geeking out on jazz and Indigenous jazz and the history of big bands on tribal lands as a result of the Indian boarding school experience, and how there is that historical precedent for an all-Indigenous big band. So like, wouldn't it be cool if we did that? Yeah, but that's a pipe dream. And then grant funding came about, and I wrote myself a dirty old grant, and we were awarded full funding, and then I was on the hook legally to find 17 Indigenous jazz musicians from around the world in Canada. But the support systems, they came about organically, I felt,
Same question to you, Danielle. In terms of your career, where have you found support that kept you going? And what is your goal? What is your dream?
Sure. Well, what I'm doing now, I'm the artistic director of Renegade Opera, which is an independent opera company in Portland. We're about to have our 5-year anniversary. I'm the producer for First Nations Performing Arts here in New York, and I'm primarily a composer and conductor, and that's what I do for those organizations. And the success that I found is also a lot within grants. So I've been lucky to get major grants from like Mellon Ford and Opera America, and I think that I've started to get more like money coming through to make my work come to life when I started making personal connections with people, because I think that sure, like you could totally like slap on the like I'm an Indigenous composer, or like look at my company, and people are like, oh yeah, cool, but to really get like, at least now, to really get like money that makes a difference, I guess, because sure, you can give somebody a couple $1,000s, but like that's not gonna have the pillars that you're talking about, but when I started talking to these larger funders, it was really about the personal connection, and I think they liked me as an artist and like as a person, and they believed in my work. And so I think that maybe that could be something that is really tangible that producers or funders or anybody that has their fingers in getting something on the stage is to, if you're passionate about the work you're going to put on, like really passionate about it, and you know the artist and you're invested, then you'll give it the care that it needs. I think, it's like the relationship is so much more important, and like the continuation of that relationship. Like the like program directors, like the grants managers that I knew from the very beginning, I still know. Like we are still in touch, and like it's found the success. But I only got, sorry, I know I'm talking forever, but I only got into
You're
those.
doing fine.
One more thing that I think contributed to being able to put on major work was I found these people and was connected with them through other Native artists. So like I had other Native artists from all disciplines, like many disciplines, that were like, oh yeah, well, have you checked out this, or do you know this person? Like you should talk to them. Oh, I know this person. And so really, like, yeah, these foundations had the money, but the connection was within my own community, and then with the accomplices around them as well.
I love that you talked about like building that relationship so that it's beyond like transactional, right? Like
Yeah.
especially when you're talking to funders or talking to presenters who are going to put on your work. It's like you get to know this person as a human. Oh, I just saw that the presenter, like she is in New York and she just got her ears pierced with her daughter or something on Instagram. And it's like, that's great for you, Kareen. I'm so excited for your new earrings. But like being able to have that personal connection and seeing the humanity of each other,
Right.
It creates an organic support for each other's art and each other's institutions.
I think too that the foundations and granting organizations, they rarely have come and just asked us what we need. No one's really directly asking us. And then the thing is, when if they just came to the communities to see, right, the great work that we're doing under such little resources, and then say, okay, well, I can step in here if that's something you want, right? If you feel like it's gonna further and build our relationship, right? I know I've been in other organizations where I've met the grantor when I lived in North Carolina. I've worked with the health and wellness program there, and I met the lieutenant general who came to see about the community because it was a large grant. It was like, big grant, big settlement grant. But that was a rare case, right? And so I think that will also help for them to say, okay, well, yeah, I see, well, we might need to look at putting more, maybe have a Native person on our board, or even just to be that voice, right, in meetings when we're deciding on how to divide up these funds this year, right? There's no Native, even just to raise the question, hey, whatever. And so I think that's a great thing for relationships.
Shaun, I'm going to ask you in a slightly different way. If we're lucky enough and honored enough that some viewers out there in YouTube are aspiring artists or artists that are already out there and doing their thing, what would you like them to know about your career path and how satisfied or frustrated you are with what you're doing as an artist?
I think the biggest thing is to really create your own work and continue to create for listen to that voice inside, and I think for me, I always wanted to tell a story about Marty.
Bye, Marty.
Oh, Marty's leaving.
Thanks for all your questions.
Thanks, Marty.
Sorry, I thought we were ending 8:30 and I have to run for an appointment. So
What time is it?
8:36.
Oh, 8:36. See, my watch died, so I have no
But we're
idea.
just talking until the sun comes up. So
Yeah.
you
we're
guys can go.
okay.
You guys go do that. I gotta run. Love seeing you all.
Yeah, okay.
Bye, Marty.
Bye, Marty.
Thank you.
Just if it's something that speaks inside of you, to create it no matter what, and it is something of, if you have a good connection to your community, really rely on them, really have it something that impacts your life or the world, or that's where I've gotten to my career. Whatever I do, I always want to have some kind of meaning of doing something for the collective good, where I think when I started off as an actor, it was very much for myself, and you can do that too, but a lot of it was very one world view, because I grew up very disconnected from my community in Browning, Montana, and it was very much centered on the individual. And through my training and through my work with phenomenal actors like the ones on this panel, and artists like the ones on this panel, and just being with my community, it's very much just a different perspective now, and a lot of it is how do we make art, you know, not just what the product is, and how is it done, and how are we interacting with each other, and it's a very collaborative experience. And so I remember one of the richest times I had was out in LA with United Voices, and everyone, I thought, well, I'm not a stage manager, I'm not a producer, I can't do that, I can't, but everyone was like, no, you have to do this, and you hold the camera if we're making a movie, or you hold the boom mic, and all of a sudden you're like getting that experience working together. And so you make your own projects, and that's how you learn, just by doing. You just have to keep doing it. Go through a lot of failure, because the failure is where you learn, you know, and fall on your face, make a lot of mistakes, and get better at it. That's what I'm doing, co-produce. I don't know, I've never been a producer, and I'm co-producing our musical, and I'm asking people for like so much money, and I'm like,
Are you giving him some?
We're gonna talk. I've been trying to get together with him.
Okay, you need to coach him.
I went to my family, I had some family out in Wyoming who sold off, you know, a lot of land, and I love them to death, and I didn't want to make it about asking for, but I did, I made a pitch, and I went on way too long, and I was like, but you don't have to give that much, but I know it's a lot of money, and he kind of gave me a lesson on how to ask for money the next time, and they gave me a little bit of money, not as much as I
I
wanted.
love when people reach an early yes and don't know it, and they keep going, and they eventually find their way to know.
Well, that's the thing, is you gotta make the pitch and let it sit there. But anyway, I'm learning a lot about producing, and you know, our hope is that we have a collaboration of producers, native producers, Broadway producers, tribal nations that are wanting to get into a Broadway type show, and then from there, which I've learned from Nicolette, is how do we collaborate with other writers, and then I would love to take, hopefully, when we have that success, to produce other native shows, and then all of a sudden there's other native producers out there. So that's what we have to keep doing.
I'm going to ask it to Nicolette, but first I want to comment on the fact that I haven't gotten one comment from you out there, and I wanted you guys to be part of the conversation. So think about something that you want to ask or add anything to it, and also to the people on Zoom. But Nicolette, the same thing. What would you tell people out there who are maybe of a Native American background? Actually, it's anybody, it's any aspiring artist, but specifically, you can be
Where there is
specific
fear, there is no creativity. And never give up. That's what I would
That's
say.
So,
Thank you. I just wanna
thank you all for being with us. Thank you, John. Thank you, Shaun. Thank you, Julie.
Please, thank you.
Danielle and Nicolette. Thank you so much for helping me put this together and helping me run this tonight. So, thank you very much. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining us.